A man is driving home after a long day at work. His hands are steady on the wheel, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The radio plays softly in the background, but his mind is elsewhere. He is thinking about his family, about what he will have for dinner, about getting home safely. Then, he notices the flashing lights in his rearview mirror. His heart rate spikes. He grips the steering wheel a little tighter. He knows he has done nothing wrong, but that does not matter. What matters is that he is black, and he is being pulled over by the police. The fear is instant. It is not the fear of getting a ticket or being scolded for a minor traffic violation. It is the fear of what could happen next. He thinks of the names. Names of people who never made it home after a routine traffic stop. Names that became hashtags, protests, and headlines. He takes a deep breath, trying to stay calm, trying to remember everything he was taught about how to survive this encounter. Hands visible, voice steady, movement slow. But he knows that even doing everything right does not guarantee his safety. For many black people, this fear is not paranoia. It is lived experience. It is history repeating itself. It is the result of a system that has treated black lives as less valuable for centuries. This is not just about one traffic stop. It is about generations of oppression, discrimination, and violence. It is about a police force that was never designed to protect them. To understand why black people fear the police, one must look at history. The roots of policing in the United States can be traced back to slave patrols. These groups were created to hunt down enslaved people who had escaped, using brutal force to return them to their owners. These patrols were not about justice or law enforcement. They were about control, about maintaining a system built on the suffering of black people. After slavery was abolished, these patrols evolved into police forces, but their purpose remained the same. Black people were still seen as threats, as criminals, as less than human. The system that once hunted them simply changed uniforms. In the United Kingdom, the story is different, but the outcome is the same. British policing has deep ties to colonialism, enforcing laws that oppressed black and brown people in countries controlled by the British Empire. When black immigrants arrived in Britain seeking a better life, they were met with suspicion, hostility, and over-policing. The police were not there to protect them. They were there to control them. Decades later, black communities in the United Kingdom still experience racial profiling, wrongful arrests, and disproportionate police violence. This history is not just in the past. It is alive today. It is in every news story about a black person killed by the police. It is in every statistic that shows black people are more likely to be stopped, searched, arrested, and brutalized. It is in the deep distrust between law enforcement and the black community, a distrust built on centuries of harm. Racial profiling is one of the biggest reasons black people fear the police. It is the reason that a black driver is more likely to be pulled over. It is the reason a black teenager is more likely to be stopped and searched. It is the reason a black person standing on a street corner can be seen as suspicious. It is a system that assumes guilt based on skin color. The numbers do not lie. Studies show that black drivers are stopped at higher rates than white drivers, even though they are less likely to be carrying drugs or weapons. Black pedestrians are searched more often, even when there is no reasonable suspicion. And when black people do have encounters with the police, they are more likely to experience violence, even if they are unarmed. These statistics are not just numbers. They are real people. They are stories of fear, trauma, and loss. They are families torn apart by a system that sees their loved ones as threats. They are mothers grieving sons who never made it home. They are fathers giving their children lectures on how to survive encounters with the police, knowing that even doing everything right may not be enough. The fear of the police is not just about the possibility of violence. It is about knowing that justice is rarely served. When a black person is killed by the police, the system protects the officers, not the victims. The investigations are slow. The trials, if they happen at all, are designed to excuse the actions of law enforcement. The officers who take black lives often walk free, while the families left behind are given nothing but thoughts and prayers. This is why the fear is so deep. It is not just about what could happen in a single encounter. It is about the knowledge that if the worst happens, there will likely be no consequences. It is about living in a world where black lives are disposable in the eyes of the law. This fear is not irrational. It is not an overreaction. It is survival. Black people learn from a young age that the police are not there to protect them. They learn that their lives are seen as less valuable. They learn that the system was never built for them. Yet, despite this fear, Black communities continue to fight for justice. They continue to demand change. They continue to march in the streets, to call for reforms, to say that their lives matter. Because they do. Because no one should have to fear for their life during a traffic stop. No one should have to wonder if they will make it home. No one should have to teach their children how to survive an encounter with those who are supposed to serve and protect. The fear is real, but so is the fight for justice. The question is, when will the world finally listen? For decades, Black communities have been raising their voices, demanding change, and exposing the realities of racism in policing. Protests have erupted time and time again, from the civil rights movement to the Black Lives Matter movement. Yet the cycle of violence continues. Each new case of police brutality sparks outrage, yet the system resists accountability. This is not a matter of a few bad officers. This is about a system built on the oppression of Black people, a system that refuses to see them as fully human. The media plays a powerful role in shaping the narrative. When a Black person is killed by the police, news reports often focus on their past, on any mistake they may have made, as if justifying their death. Mugshots are used instead of family photos. Headlines suggest they were resisting, aggressive, or in the wrong place at the wrong time. Meanwhile, the officers involved are given protection, their identities hidden, their actions excused. The message is clear. Black lives are not given the same value. This is why Black parents are forced to have difficult conversations with their children. The talk is not just about manners or respect. It is about survival. Hands visible, no sudden movements, speak calmly, comply no matter how unfair it seems. Yet, even these precautions do not guarantee safety. The deaths of unarmed Black people prove that compliance does not always mean survival. Philando Castile followed every instruction, yet he was still shot in front of his girlfriend and child. In the United Kingdom, the story is just as grim. Black people are more than 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched by police. Despite making up a small percentage of the population, they face a disproportionate amount of police violence. The case of Chris Kaba, an unarmed Black man shot and killed by police in London, sent shockwaves through the country. His family demanded answers, but the silence from law enforcement was deafening. The pattern repeats across continents, proving that racism in policing is not just an American problem. When Black people speak out against this injustice, they are often met with resistance. Some people argue that if they do not break the law, they will have nothing to fear. But this argument ignores reality. Black people have been killed for holding a cell phone, for playing in a park, for sleeping in their own home. The fear is not about guilt or innocence. It is about a system that sees Blackness as a threat in itself. The trauma of police violence extends beyond the victims. Entire communities live in fear, watching each new case unfold, knowing that it could have been them. Black children grow up with the understanding that the police are not their protectors. They see the way their parents tense up at the sight of flashing lights. They see the way officers treat people who look like them. They learn that justice is often out of reach. The fear turns into anger, frustration, and exhaustion. Black people are told to protest peacefully, yet even kneeling during the national anthem is met with backlash. They are told to trust the system, yet the system continues to fail them. They are told that things are getting better, yet they continue to see names added to the list of lives lost to police violence. In some cases, the body cameras meant to hold officers accountable are turned off at critical moments. The footage that does exist often tells the same tragic story. A Black person begging for their life, an officer claiming to feel threatened, a life taken too soon. The officers rarely face consequences. The families are left to mourn, to fight for justice, to relive the trauma again and again. The anger is justified. The protests are necessary. The demand for change cannot be ignored. Black communities have spent generations calling for police reform, for an end to racial profiling, for accountability. They have laid out clear solutions, banning chokeholds, ending qualified immunity, investing in community-led safety programs. But these demands are met with resistance, with excuses, with politicians who offer thoughts and prayers instead of action. Racism in policing is not just about individual officers. It is about a culture that protects its own, that allows officers with a history of misconduct to remain in uniform. It is about policies that criminalize blackness, that justify excessive force, that treat black people as suspects first and victims second. It is about a system that was never designed to serve black communities, only to control them. Black people should not have to live in fear of those who are supposed to protect them. They should not have to teach their children survival tactics for encounters with the police. They should not have to fight for justice after every tragic loss. But until real change happens, the fear will remain. The question is, how much longer will the world allow this to continue? The fight is far from over. The voices demanding justice are growing louder. The truth is being exposed. The world is watching. But will it listen? History has shown that systemic change does not come easily. It is met with resistance, with denial, with people who refuse to acknowledge the depth of the problem. But black communities continue to push forward, refusing to be silenced, refusing to accept a reality where they must live in fear. They march, they organize, they educate, and they demand accountability. The question is, how long can a system built on injustice continue to stand? In response to the protests and calls for reform, governments and police departments often make promises. They talk about change, about diversity training, about improving relationships with black communities. But promises mean nothing without action. Training sessions cannot erase centuries of systemic racism. Community meetings cannot undo the trauma of generations. The real test is whether these institutions are willing to dismantle the structures that uphold racial injustice. So far, the evidence suggests otherwise. The reality is that racism in policing is not just about what happens on the streets. It is embedded in laws, in courtrooms, in policies that give officers the power to act with impunity. The legal system protects them, shielding them from consequences even when their actions are captured on camera. The process of holding police accountable is slow, frustrating, and often ineffective. Officers who kill unarmed black people frequently keep their jobs or are quietly moved to different departments. Even when they do face charges, convictions are rare. This lack of accountability sends a clear message. Black lives are not valued in the same way. If they were, justice would not be so difficult to achieve. The families of victims would not have to beg for answers. The protests would not be necessary. The cycle of violence would not repeat itself. But time and time again, black communities are forced to watch as history repeats itself. The pain is fresh with every new name, every new case, every new video that surfaces showing another black life taken too soon. It is not enough to demand better training for officers. The entire structure of policing must be reimagined. The question must be asked, what does public safety truly mean? For black communities, safety does not come from an increased police presence. It does not come from officers with military-grade weapons patrolling neighborhoods. True safety comes from investment in communities, from opportunities, from addressing the root causes of crime rather than criminalizing black existence. Studies have shown that when communities have access to good education, stable jobs, affordable housing, and mental health resources, crime rates decrease. Yet, instead of investing in these areas, governments continue to pour money into expanding police forces, giving them more power, more weapons, and more authority over black lives. This is not about public safety. It is about control. It is about maintaining a system that was never designed to serve black people, only to keep them in check. The fear of the police is not just about brutality. It is about the constant surveillance, the feeling of being watched, the knowledge that at any moment, an encounter with an officer could turn deadly. It is about the exhaustion of having to justify why black lives matter, of having to prove that the fear is real, of having to relive trauma every time another name is added to the list. Black activists and organizations have been leading the fight for real solutions. They are pushing for alternatives to policing, for community-led safety programs, for restorative justice initiatives that focus on healing rather than punishment. They are calling for the defunding of police departments that have proven time and time again that they do not protect black lives. This does not mean eliminating public safety. It means shifting resources to where they are truly needed, to the programs that prevent crime rather than responding to it with force. The resistance to these ideas is strong. People who have never experienced the fear of being targeted by police struggle to understand why reform is not enough. But for Black communities, reform has been promised for decades, and little has changed. The time for small changes has passed. The system itself must be torn down and rebuilt in a way that truly serves all people, not just those who have the privilege of feeling safe. The fear of the police is not irrational. It is not an overreaction. It is a survival mechanism, passed down through generations of Black families who have seen what happens when the system is left unchecked. It is a fear that is validated by history, by statistics, by lived experiences. And until true change happens, that fear will remain. But so will the fight. Black communities are not giving up. They refuse to accept a world where they must live in fear. They are demanding justice, demanding change, demanding a future where their children do not have to learn survival tactics for dealing with police. The world is listening. The question is, when will it finally act? Change does not happen overnight, and history has proven that those in power rarely surrender it willingly. But Black communities have never waited for permission to demand justice. They have always been at the forefront of change, pushing against systems designed to oppress them. From the abolition of slavery to the civil rights movement, every step toward justice has been met with resistance, yet the fight has never stopped. Today, that same determination fuels the movement to hold police accountable and dismantle the structures that uphold racism. Despite the overwhelming evidence of racial injustice in policing, many refuse to acknowledge the problem. Some insist that police violence is not about race, that officers are simply doing their jobs. But if that were true, why do Black people face higher rates of stops, searches, arrests, and deaths at the hands of police? Why do cases of white individuals committing violent crimes end with peaceful arrests, while unarmed Black people are met with deadly force? The double standard is undeniable. A white mass shooter can be taken into custody without harm, even after killing innocent people. Meanwhile, a Black person reaching for their wallet during a traffic stop is considered a threat. The fear is not imagined. It is reinforced by every injustice, every life lost, every time an officer walks free after killing an unarmed Black person. This reality is not just an American problem. Across the world, Black communities face similar struggles with law enforcement. In the United Kingdom, Black people are disproportionately targeted under stop-and-search policies. In France, protests erupted over police brutality against Black and Arab communities. In Brazil, police violence in favelas claims countless Black lives. The pattern is global because the roots of systemic racism run deep. The call for change is not just about punishing individual officers. It is about dismantling a system that allows this brutality to continue. It is about challenging the way policing functions, questioning why officers are given military-grade weapons, why they're trained to see Black people as threats, why their power goes unchecked. For years, activists have been pushing for reforms that go beyond surface-level changes. They are demanding an end to qualified immunity, the legal protection that shields officers from being sued for their actions. They are calling for independent investigations into police misconduct, so that officers are not simply investigated by their own colleagues. They are fighting for the reallocation of police budgets, shifting funding away from law enforcement and into mental health services, education, and community programs that actually prevent crime. The backlash against these demands is strong. Police unions fight to maintain their power. Politicians hesitate to challenge the status quo. The media often portrays activists as radicals, ignoring the fact that these demands are rooted in justice, in data, in the lived experiences of Black people who have suffered under the weight of police violence. But history has shown that real change only comes when people refuse to accept injustice. It comes when communities rise up, when voices refuse to be silenced, when the truth is exposed and can no longer be ignored. The protests that have swept across nations are not just moments of anger. They are declarations of a new reality, one where Black people refuse to live in fear, where they demand to be treated as human beings, where they refuse to be victims of a system that was never designed to protect them. The fight for justice is long, exhausting, and often painful. But Black communities have never backed down. They have always found ways to resist, to survive, to push forward even in the face of relentless oppression. And now, the world is watching. The question is, will those in power finally listen? Will they dismantle the system that has taken so many lives? Or will they continue to make excuses, to ignore the pain, to pretend that justice is being served while Black people continue to die? Change is not just possible. It is necessary. It is urgent. And it will happen. Not because the system allows it, but because Black communities will never stop fighting for it. Justice delayed is justice denied. The time for change is now.